You're watching Cyber Made Human, the podcast that takes complex emerging technology and cyber topics and makes it into accessible and understandable content. I'm your host, Alice Violet, and it's October, which means it's Halloween. So this is a special Halloween episode where we look at some of the biggest fails in AI and cyber in 2025 so far. We're joined by Charlie Kelly, formerly CrowdStrike and Microsoft, and Derek Ahmedzai, who's a new member of our team at Alice Violet Creative, but also a leader in Bristol of his own AI agency called The Peeps. Halloween, and we're doing a special Halloween themed episode where we're going to dive into the biggest horror stories in AI and cyber that have happened in the year so far. And I'm delighted to have not one but two guests today on Cyber Made Human. So welcome. We'll start with the wonderful Derek Ahmedzai, who was on a recent episode talking about AI ethics with Richard Norton from The Peeps, and also AVC, Alice Violet Creative's newest consultant. You've been added to the team as one of our brand specialists, and we're going to be working on some really exciting big rebrand projects and things together with clients. So welcome back to the show, and welcome to the team as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, we're excited to be working together.
Thank you. And Charlie Kelly, aka Charles, who we've probably known each other now for 3.5 years.
I'd say, yeah, probably 3.5, maybe 4.
Wow.
Yeah, time flies.
Time flies. So we know each other through the Cynam and Hub8 ecosystem here in Cheltenham. You are a serial entrepreneur, and you also former Microsoft, former CrowdStrike. Now you work for?
I work for a company called Stripe OLT, based down in Bristol.
Okay.
They are a mid-size sort of cybersecurity provider. We do basically everything in sort of the IT and the cyberspace. So a lot smaller than CrowdStrike and Microsoft, but still doing really important work for some really, really nice and really important customers.
Okay, cool. And then in terms of the entrepreneurial things that you've done or are currently doing, you have Brink Coffee.
Yep, little coffee company, completely non-cyber, completely other end of the whole kind of tech and cyber ecosystem. It's a nice little creative outlet. Big coffee fan, so if I can do kind of something that I enjoy in my spare time that gets me away from a computer, then that's a win-win.
And also Fish Deck.
And Fish Deck, which does not get me away from a computer. That keeps me by a computer. Yeah, we do phishing simulations and sort of keeping people secure, really, just by testing their employees' potential weaknesses and sort of understanding where that human vulnerability and that human gap might be for them.
Okay, nice. So today we're going to be diving into the biggest horror stories of the year in honour of Halloween, which was our wonderful producer and editor Jack McCune's idea. Charlie hasn't worn his Halloween themed outfit, so that does mean you're going to have to start. So Derek's going to be focusing on some of the biggest AI fails or bad uses of AI, things that have gone wrong, and you're going to be focusing on cyber. Based on the fact that you used to work for both CrowdStrike and Microsoft, I don't think we can do this episode without acknowledging the royal fails that happened there. Can you give us any insight? And first of all, for anyone who doesn't know, tell us what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're probably talking about CrowdStrike there with that one, and a little wobble that they had last year. You might have seen in the news, there were some issues and some airports ended up not being able to fly. About 20 million customers, 20 million computers all around the world effectively were stuck in a blue screen loop. Now, the blue screen is a part of Windows that when it can't start correctly, it gets stuck in this sort of cycle of just displaying kind of an error message and not being able to get into the computer and what you need to do. And this screen started appearing all over the world in a matter of hours. People woke up one morning and, as I say, airports, schools, businesses, everywhere was affected by this. It hit the news pretty hard. It was pretty widespread, mainly from the sort of travel side. It kicked off really on a Friday afternoon. So obviously a big travel day for people, going abroad, coming back. So airports really felt that really, really quickly. And that stemmed from ultimately an issue that no one thought was going to be an issue. It kind of came out of the middle of nowhere. Something that CrowdStrike did very, very regularly and had been doing historically for a very long time. There was a bit of an issue with the sort of latest update, the latest version of that. And it effectively got pushed out and kind of propagated through about 20 million computers in pretty short space of time, and the impact of that is massive, very, very quickly, very widespread, and if you hadn't have heard of CrowdStrike then, they were all over every newspaper, every sort of news homepage. It was all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people got to know CrowdStrike, or at least the name, very, very quickly because of that. I was there at the time. I was working for CrowdStrike. It was all hands on deck. Everybody was in. We were talking to customers. We were sending people to customer locations and getting them back up and running again. So mistakes happen, but it really is about how you kind of respond to them and how you present yourself in the media. And I think actually they are pretty unscathed, really. They've still got, some amazing customers, some massive customers in loads of different verticals. And even though they had that little bit of a wobble, very public wobble, the trust hasn't changed in what they do. And they protect people, that is what they do fundamentally.
I guess if I'm right in understanding, they put out a patch for a security flaw, which they must do multiple times a day. Whenever things happen, you have to patch your computers and your phones and your apps to make sure that vulnerability has been looked after. But what they didn't do was do a test on a specific data set to make sure that when they rolled out that patch update, it wasn't going to take everybody offline. And obviously, so it was their fault. It wasn't that someone got into their system and hacked their system. It was that they made a mistake that took everyone offline, which in a way is better because it means that as a cybersecurity company, they weren't breached. But it's worse in that it was entirely their fault. And so what was the monetary cost of those failings? Do you know?
So I don't know. I don't know what the monetary kind of, value was of those failings, but I know that obviously there was a massive knock-on impact, and where you've got your big airlines effectively grounded, not able to, get people in the air and get people moving. I think, that starts to add up very, very quickly. Big companies who can't afford downtime, they can't afford, even 5 minutes of outage because it starts costing a lot of money very quickly. We're a 24/7 world, more than we've ever been. And I think when you're looking at flights and, airlines and those really big companies who just operate sort of without us really thinking, all of the logistics, when you think about what happens in the background of a major airline, it's not just the planes, it's everything behind it. It's all of the air traffic control, it's all of the scheduling, it's all of the baggage, it's all of the food that ends up on the plane, it's everything. And if you've got even 5 minutes where something in that link isn't up and running, the knock-on effect and sort of the cascade of that downtime, starts adding up, and that equals money. When there's even the slightest 30 seconds of downtime, the impact is so rapid and so serious. I think, it really puts these companies in a public limelight. And, they're in the spotlight, not necessarily for the good reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's a bit like LastPass. I think a few years ago, LastPass was breached, and LastPass is a password manager. Yeah. And so it's supposed to be a security solution that you will use a password manager. And actually, for the password manager to have been hacked means all your super encrypted passwords have now been breached. And I don't know whether LastPass has ever recovered from that. And I wonder whether, I know you mentioned CrowdStrike probably are in some quite strong contracts and they probably have a lot of budget in terms of legality and things. And they're not necessarily end user. They're not selling to an end user. They're B2B, aren't they?
Yeah,
so that might be why they're able to, get over that. Whereas if you are selling to an end user, once that trust is broken, I think it's very hard to get that back.
Completely. Yeah. I think, LastPass is a great example. All they do ultimately is security. They exist to secure your secure things,
Yeah.
And when something like that happens, when a LastPass breach happens and, people's accounts are compromised, and that trust is irreparable, really. With LastPass, when your sole point is to protect these credentials, one slip up is all it takes. Now, going back to the CrowdStrike side of things, they haven't had so much reputational damage from that because it wasn't a security incident. Like you say, they weren't hacked, they weren't compromised, that there was nothing there. It was an internal development error. and a lot of the press jumped on it and speculated that there'd been a cyber attack or a hack. And I think it would have been very different if there was a security incident. I think that trust would have been degraded in a lot of ways between a lot of customers. I think the fact that it was, more of a technical issue and a genuine outage, an availability outage, sort of played in their favor, because if it had been a security incident, then it would have been a very different story.
So with that, can you give us a glimpse behind the scenes on the crisis management from like the comms team when something like that happens? So if you're a company watching this, even a small business, and you think if you have been hacked or you have suffered an outage, a technical issue that really damages your reputation to your clients, how were they managing it? What can we learn about what they did well and badly in that situation?
Transparency is key. Communication to your customers quickly and coherently, and just explaining what is going on is really the difference between keeping that trust and not keeping that trust. We see, again, speculation these days is so rapid, it's so wildfire. The press like to run with a cyber attack narrative a lot of the time, even when they don't have all of the facts. It's a nice kind of clickbaity headline, oh, so-and-so has been attacked, or so-and-so goes offline after an attack, with absolutely no proof or, no evidence to back it up. So I think really you've got to come out ahead of that, and you've got to explain what's happening. It's best to hold your hands up, even if it's just a really quick... you see companies these days who, they just tweet something. They go, we're aware of an outage, or we're aware of an issue right now. We're looking into it, and we'll get back to you later.
So now we're going to shuffle over to you, Derek.
Okay.
And move on to kind of your first AI horror story of the year.
Well, I suppose, okay, so we've got things like chatbots like Grok that have just been, allowed to go free, essentially. And the thing that when people were making bots years ago, there was like a kind of almost like a code of like, you're responsible for what your bot puts out.
Right.
So you would make sure that it did not create content that was, I don't know, illegal or defamatory or anything like that. So if you had an artist bot, you'd make sure it would never be able to draw a swastika, or it would never be able to say like, words that you blacklisted. Whereas, things like Grok, they seem to revel in the fact that it's just able to do anything, say anything. And, you only have to go back a few years to see when Microsoft brought out their Tay chatbot, that they said, it's going to learn from the internet. It's going to be really nice, really pleasant, to use. And people were obviously, treating it like any internet thing, putting, bad content in, and it became like, racist and offensive in a matter of days. And then Microsoft just turned it off, obviously, because of like the reputational risk. Whereas, with X, they're quite happy just to run this thing because, if it was just like an accident, that's like the incompetence end, they would probably turn it off. But I think they're happy with the headlines that it gets.
That's interesting, because I think with Grok, I probably have purposefully not really explored it because of the wonderful Elon. And I wonder, because of the types of people that tend to like Elon Musk are probably quite controversial, that then would mean that the AI is learning off more and more controversial things.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
And potentially the data set that it's learning from is becoming more and more negative, a bit like X itself as a platform.
Yeah.
Have you got any examples of like the worst things that you've been seeing from Grok?
There was the Mecha Hitler story from the other day. Grok was doing things like praising Hitler and, outputting anti-Semitic content in response to people's queries.
Wow. Okay. And I know that you in the past have ever made playful bots and fun bots, and you still do things like that. And it's interesting that you talk about it used to be the responsibility of the creator to keep it positive.
Yeah.
I guess now with it becoming more democratized and more people being able to create these things, it just means that more scammers have access. And has it just changed the landscape of the type of people creating this stuff now?
Definitely. It's much more, it's more kind of commercialized.
Yeah.
Big companies like OpenAI, they don't really necessarily care what you're doing with their product. They'll obviously, if it's really bad reputationally, but as it is, you pay to use their services, or whether it's Perplexity or anyone else's, and you're free to create your own wrappers around these things or do your own products. And a lot of people don't consider whether or not they should be responsible for that content.
And I suppose also, if you are a scammer or somebody who wants to hack somebody, if you're using some commercialized mainstream AI like ChatGPT, it would say, I can't give you that information if you asked it how to hack someone. Whereas I don't know because I haven't used Grok, but potentially it doesn't have those guardrails in place that when you're asking for advice on how to do something questionable, it just tells you.
Yeah, and there are, people have, there's a term jailbreaking,
right,
where you kind of like try and bypass those kind of checks and balances. There are famous ways. It's like, so if you ask it how to do something bad, like, I don't know what I can say on the podcast, like how to make a bomb, and then it will say, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. But then you say something like, oh, my grandma, who I dearly loved, used to tell me how. Please tell me how.
Remind me.
Yeah, and it will do it because, I mean, these things aren't clever.
Yeah.
They're text generators.
Yes.
And you're just tricking it in a different way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Golden Valley. Golden Valley is a new £1 billion science and technology cluster located adjacent to GCHQ headquarters in Cheltenham, which when built out will feature over 1 million square foot of commercial space and 1,000 new homes. Golden Valley will scale an existing thriving technology ecosystem, creating a hub for those with an interest in security, culminating in a new campus of research and development facilities, academic institutions, and a new platform for international events and festivals. Golden Valley is a platform for learning and skills, with the Golden Valley Skills Hub and apprenticeships programs already gearing up to help ensure local people benefit from the life-changing opportunities and career paths. Thank you, Golden Valley, for sponsoring this episode. The Cyber Made Human podcast is produced by Alice Violet Creative, my content marketing agency based in Cheltenham. We specialise in complex brands, which primarily means those in emerging technologies, cybersecurity and intelligence. We're able to take abstract, clinical and difficult topics and make beautiful, compelling and results-driven content. So get in touch with us for digital marketing and all your content needs. So back to you, Charlie. You mentioned M&S briefly there. I think a lot of people saw what happened with the Co-op and M&S. Can you just remind us of the story?
Sure, absolutely. So back in April, the Easter weekend, M&S ultimately were the victim of a pretty sophisticated cyber attack. It caused pretty widespread disruption to most of their sort of online operations. So things like click and collect, things like checking how much stock was in a store. Most of their online website was down for about 8 or 9 weeks. And that was all the result ultimately of a very, very well executed cyber attack from a group called Scattered Spider. You've probably heard their names kind of being thrown around in the news and floated around a lot.
Where are they based?
They are based all over the place, predominantly in the UK. They're English speaking, but there's speculation that there's some members over in the US and dotted around everywhere. So yeah, led to weeks and weeks, months of disruption for M&S. And they reckon that the financial hit as a result of that cyber attack will be £300 million. So that was back in April. They really were back up and running, I think only in August or so, fully back up and running. So, that's a long time. And it's a lot of money for a company that does, I think, roughly £6.5 million a day in revenue.
I was going to say, what's the percentage? Do we know the percentage impact of that 300 billion?
So I don't have the percentage, but I know that, that's a big hit to their bottom line. It's a big hit to anyone's bottom line. You can be the biggest company in the world. You can be Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. 300 million is a big hit. So yeah, they've really only kind of got recovered from that in the last couple of months. And the kind of group that was involved, Scattered Spider, they arrested 4 people. I think back in July. Yeah, your sort of computer misuse acts, you've got money laundering, and I think this time in sort of a kind of landmark prosecution, these teenagers, they're all under 20. Some of them are still in school, right, and college. They're getting charged under being associated with a terrorist group. Because again, these cyber groups, these adversaries, these actor groups, they are causing the same level of destruction as terrorist groups.
Yeah.
They are taking complete companies offline. They're bankrupting companies. They are, in some cases, they're causing disruption to life. when we're kind of looking at more advanced attacks on CNI, critical national infrastructure, they've got the power to, stop people from having running water, electricity, those fundamental things. And we in the UK and all of the foreign allies and partners are really taking this, kind of up a notch now with these groups, and they're really trying to deter, especially future young people who are 16, 17, are bored at school, are playing around with computers and things, and they've really got to understand the boundaries.
Yeah.
They've really got to understand that they can't be doing this.
And what was their motivation? Was it a ransomware attack, and did they make any money as a group?
Yeah, so it was a ransomware attack, ultimately. So Scattered Spider are the sort of group behind the access and getting into M&S and sort of being able to actually pass that access on to someone else. And then they brought in a group called Dragon Force, who are a ransomware as a service group.
Wow.
And ultimately this is a proper enterprise where you can effectively buy the capability to fully ransomware a company.
Wow.
Dragon Force take a cut of the profit, and Scattered Spider effectively take the rest of the money for brokering the access. And I think, this is the era we're in. It's not people in hoodies anymore. There's that sort of stereotypical image of hackers sitting in a hoodie typing green text into a computer. These are proper criminal enterprises. They have HR departments. They are proper businesses now. And, you can just buy a service, just as I can buy a sandwich off the shelf. They can buy a ransomware service off a virtual shelf. And yeah, it completely cripples companies. Now, M&S weren't completely crippled. They're back up and running. They had backups, they had recovery plans. But we've seen in the past, companies go completely under. So it's not known whether they paid a ransom. It's not known whether they made any money from it. There's speculation. There's always going to be, kind of rumors floating around. The only people who know are M&S, whether they paid a ransom.
I think I've been having conversations with people recently about more companies actually paying the ransom because it's becoming so much more sophisticated. It might have actually been Kath Golding, former GCHQ. Yeah. She was saying that sometimes, especially in critical national infrastructure, they do have to pay the ransom because it's so essential to just get back online.
Completely.
And then they might have to go backwards and work out what happened.
Yeah.
So I guess the only positive that's come out of that story, because it was M&S and also the Co-op had something similar, I believe, is that it is becoming a mainstream conversation. Friends that I have completely outside the industry and things like my sister were mentioning it. And these are people who've never said the word cyber to me before. That's positive that people understand the risk a bit more.
Completely. The more we talk about this and the more it becomes the norm to publicize these incidents and discuss them, but also deter the people doing them, with criminal prosecution and legal proceedings, the easier this gets ultimately for everybody involved. It becomes easier for defenders to defend against it because we're having, open conversations and we're sharing intelligence, what we call IOCs, indicators of compromise. And the more open this dialogue is, the more everybody benefits and everybody understands, the sort of practices and the techniques that these groups are using. Now, they're always going to be evolving.
Well, also, I guess, sorry to interrupt you, but I guess that actually by arresting these people, I imagine that they're going to give them a plea deal where they say, if you tell us more about the organisations that you're working with, more about the way that you did this and why, and show us more of the kind of spiderweb of the people involved, then you'll get a lesser sentence, and that allows them to learn what people are doing.
It's a difficult balance, right? Because it's advantageous for everybody to offer a reduced sentence in return for information and connections and things. But in the same breath, it's also advantageous for these criminals and these groups to get the maximum sentence because it deters future people from doing it. You take it as an example to kids who are maybe thinking about sort of messing around or anything like that, these 16-year-olds, and they're seeing, people who have done it before them go to prison, until they're in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
It's a fine line.
I'm guessing because you've seen this happen recently, is like one of the key drivers, the kind of ease of use of like using crypto for making the ransom demands and getting paid, because young people are now, seeing that every day, all the time. information about crypto and being exposed to scams and frauds and things like that? Is that one of the drivers? And also going back to what you said about finding out more, if people are paying via crypto, is it possible to monitor who's paying who? Could you see if someone did pay a ransomware, or is it like, are they going through systems that make that opaque?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think crypto is a lot more mainstream than it was a long time ago. It's so easy to get to now. There's no barriers to it. You probably remember the days when when cryptocurrencies were sort of first a thing. You had to have a physical wallet. You had I think those little kind of ledgers and those little USB sticks effectively that you plugged in, and they stored your wallet. They stored your Bitcoin or whatever currency it was. These days, you download an app, right? You get Coinbase, or I think Revolut have a crypto offering now. It's just everywhere, and I think it has become a lot more accessible, and I think the education on it is there as well. These kids know what they're doing with it. They know how to get up and running with it. I think when we're talking about ransom, from a defensive perspective, paying the ransom is the worst thing you can do ultimately. And obviously you mentioned about CNI and things. If you have to get back up and running because you have CNI or a business critical function, sometimes paying is the quickest way, because you get your key, you get your stuff back up and running, and that's it. But by paying, you are funding that next wave and the subsequent waves of these attacks. 20 million, let's say, is a typical ransom for a massive organization. How far does 20 million pounds go, or $20 million in buying infrastructure, buying domains, buying all of the stuff you need to carry out these attacks? It costs nothing. This funds generations of these attacks.
And also, I think when I worked with Sophos, we used to cover stories where people would pay a ransom and they never get it back anyway. They don't necessarily, sometimes the scammers don't actually even have your data. They've made it inaccessible and they've taken you offline, but they actually had no intention of ever helping you get that back, and they'll just vanish. And then additional scammers might come in and say, we can help you get your data back, you can pay X. And it's like a never ending thing. Once you've started showing them that you'll pay to get your data back, you'll just be scammed and scammed and scammed.
Well, it's the same with losing any kind of account, but it's worse with crypto. Like, you see it on Instagram and other things. Someone says, I'm locked out of my wallet. And then you get all the bots piling in. As you say, I'll help you.
Exactly.
And they just want to take you.
Yeah, interesting. So taking a slightly different turn into kind of the mental health area, I know that we have an episode coming up actually this month. We're doing a live episode on the empathy algorithm and how more and more people are turning to large language models like ChatGPT for therapy and confiding in them, or they're having AI girlfriends or friends or whatever it is, because you get an immediate answer, it's private, there's lots of reasons that people are using it. But there's some huge risks for using an AI chatbot as a therapist or a friend. And there are some unfortunate stories coming out this year. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Definitely, yeah. So just the other day, the Independent said that the headline was ChatGPT is causing mania, psychosis and death. And it's for exactly that reason. And there was a story in the NY Times earlier as well. A girl had used a chatbot as a therapist and had committed suicide. And so it's really using all these automated tools in place of real therapy. And the tools are set up to be kind of flattering to the user. They're set up to be always like praising you, and it's not a very good model for real communication. And it is very easy to kind of fall into either weird kind of relationships or kind of parasocial relationships or whatever, like you said, falling in love with kind of AI boyfriends or girlfriends. And you just see stories all the time now, whether it's on like Reddit or Mumsnet or whatever. People are it's in the real world now. People are using these things in place of real human connection. And in some cases it can be good and healthy, but others, like the Independent story, it can really kind of spiral and cause problems. If you're talking to a chatbot and it's constantly saying, yeah, you're right. It's, you could be doing all kinds of bad things.
Yeah, and I read a story recently actually about someone who was in a relationship with someone who used AI chatbots, and when they were kind of having difficult conversations, rather than just going to each other, their partner would go to the chatbot, and then often, have conversation that would lead them in a different path or echo chamber everything that they said, and it ended up ruining that relationship, I think. And ultimately, human connection and an AI chatbot is so different, and relying on kind of a large language model based on huge amounts of data that's just giving you a succinct answer that it thinks is the right thing to say
At that time
is so damaging, and in that case lost a relationship, and in other cases people have taken their lives. It is scary.
It definitely is. And it's not just kind of interpersonal stuff as well. It's like business communications.
Yeah.
So people are using this to workshop what they want to say to someone else. They're using it to, write difficult emails, write difficult communications, and it's getting to the point. It's like people used to joke, "Oh, you'll send a message to the, ChatGPT, it will turn it into something else, and then the other person will get it and they'll turn it back into text that they read." And so no one's ever really getting the real message, but it's happening now all the time.
Yes.
And me at the Peeps, we put a grant bid in recently, and we used ChatGPT just to kind of like tighten it up. We thought, we'd the thing that everybody thinks, oh, we'll match the language that they're writing in, and make sure that the grant is suitable. And then at the end of the process, the funder said, "Oh, we had so many obvious AI grant applications. Please just write in normal language.
Yeah,
And say what you want to say, because everyone is doing this."
I've had that with job applications. I feel like when I put a job out for my business now, it's so obvious that all they've done is put the job application in, and then it's spat out a CV that covers all the keywords in my job application. And when you look at their job history, they've never worked in marketing or content. And I'm like, well, how have you done strategies for B2B and tech companies? It's because that's what I'm saying we do.
Yeah,
and it is frustrating. And I think if people are using it on dating apps as well, if you're looking at a profile and then just making yourself the perfect person, but you're not, why do that? Because you're just pretending to connect with someone that you would have never connected with.
It's just a different mechanism of like the other, like catfishing or any other kind of misrepresenting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're starting to move into that phase now where, every opportunity possible, every text field has got a little AI button next to it. Now, I think I saw on Instagram now, when you make a new post, it gives you the option to AI generate a caption for your post. Now, that's not the point of social media, right? That was never the point of specifically Instagram, where you share a photo of what you're doing with a little caption about it. We're teaching kids to be independent thinkers, and we're constantly telling everybody to be their true selves and be independent and not have to cover or anything like that, whilst simultaneously these apps are removing the need to think. And I think long term, because it's still relatively fresh, this is relatively new in Instagram, long term that's probably going to be quite damaging. And when you couple that with the AI generated content, for example, which I'm sure you're super familiar with, we're going to have AI generated content with AI generated captions with real people behind it.
Well,
and
not
even real people in some, of course. But what's the point? For lack of a better explanation, what's the point?
I mean, I'd love to know what you think, Derek, because you create a lot of AI generated content. That's kind of your specialism. But in terms of as a user, it makes me think, would I even want to use social media? Because when ChatGPT first came out, I admittedly became quite dependent on it. It was just amazing. But then I suddenly got sick of it and bored of it and realised that, okay, it might get rid of my typos in 2 seconds, but the work I was putting out wasn't as good. And it does save certain time and efficiency. And as you were saying with social media, if it's an AI generated image with an AI generated caption, why am I as a human being interested?
Yeah, why are you interested in posting it? And why is anyone else interested in seeing it or reading it? And I think most people aren't. There's that dead internet theory, which says that most of the content online has been created by bots to be consumed by bots, and humans are just existing on the periphery of this. So, I mean, there is an awful lot of junk. And Nort's his favourite saying is it's Sturgeon's law, like 90% of everything is crap.
Yeah.
generally anyway. But then when you add in all this kind of bot related content,
Yeah.
that just makes the volume of it so much worse.
Mm.
But yeah, we're seeing that when we're talking to younger people, not into AI as much or even at all. So I think it's very much a generational thing.
Yeah.
Like obviously I'm quite old. Was it Douglas Adams said that things that are invented in your lifetime have like an element of magic or seem magic to you.
Mm.
And so but if you've always grown up with it, it's commonplace.
Yeah.
So to my generation or for older people, it's really cool. It's a fun thing. But for young kids, it's just another, it's not interesting on its own. But also there's the element of cringe. Like there's so much bad content.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to know when text is fake or when images are fake. That can turn people off very quickly.
I wonder if it is obvious though. I think it might be obvious to certain people, but this makes me think that what we're going to see is more things like romance scams, where we can create an AI companion. You could pretend to be a real woman or a real man, and it'd be much easier.
I think one-to-one is harder because there's that emotional when your brain's not necessarily thinking properly. But when it's like a story from a brand, you're disconnected, and so you can think, oh well, I don't like that because that obviously feels like it reads wrong or looks wrong.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I think on your point about kind of how it seems a bit magical, to kind of people that haven't had it before. Yeah. And I think, we're right at the start of this, it's still in a bit of a bubble for us, I think. But, the generational kind of differences in the next couple of years when kids that are growing up now and getting their first phones and are getting on Instagram and everything, this is just going to be normal to them. They're never going to, have had that bit where they've had no AI whatsoever, but now they're just going to have the little button that generates them a nice little caption and a bunch of hashtags.
I think part of that is like, so the people who fall for these scams, like the CEOs and things, they don't have the experience of seeing this stuff, and they're older and more credible, credulous. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's a worry because like everyone on Facebook liking these obviously fake images tend to be, I mean, Facebook like an old person platform, isn't it?
Yeah. Give us one more bonus small horror story each. Derek first.
So AI's taking our jobs. And everyone was like kind of poo-pooing that idea, but it really is because it's obviously not up to the individual. It's up to, it's CEOs are buying into the idea that AI is reduces costs and efficiencies, increases efficiencies because that's what they're being, it's being sold as, and it's happening. Whether it's there's just an article yesterday by a guy called Brian Merchant who wrote Blood in the Machine about the Luddites, and he wrote an article saying that translators are like one of their worst group hit. So because now AI translation is good enough for most people. People aren't using freelancers anymore. They aren't using agencies or agents. They're using agencies, but the agencies are using AI, and they might give content to translators just to kind of proof and edit and fix, but at a much reduced rate. So a lot of people who that's their main job are losing all that work. And the same story, whether it's like a illustrator, juniors, there's a whole problem about juniors. How are they going to get into the industry if all the work that they're doing is now being outsourced to AI tools? So whether it's software development, whether it's drawing, illustration, writing.
And it's such a shame with creative things because, like translators, a book that I love is called The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig, which was originally written in German and translated to English. And the translator wrote a kind of prologue, and they always kind of present why they've chosen certain words. And when you look at translating a book, and this is a really poetic, beautifully written book, they could have easily just stuck the German version and said make it English, but they specifically chose specific words that evoke an emotion, or what a shame to lose that. I'm
it's
really
idioms
sad to
and
hear
meanings
that.
and very so that's a big problem.
And you'd lose the kind of storytelling tone of voice of the writer and just have any version. So very sad to hear that. What's your final horror story?
So I think on a similar tangent with sort of the not necessarily jobs being taken, but with the use of AI to kind of, do things in a different way. it's making life hard from a cyber defense perspective, because you've got attackers now who can write very, very convincing, phishing prompts or emails or anything else that they're going to use to attack you in any language of their choice. You used to see sort of back a couple of years ago with your kind of typical phishing emails, there'd be spelling mistakes, there'd be weird sort of formatting, weird wording. And that was typically, down to some part that they might not be communicating in their native language. Now, that's not a problem, because they can ask, ChatGPT, Grok, whatever LLM you want, to, who they're targeting, what they're trying to do. And you can literally say, write me a convincing, hook or a convincing story or a convincing email in this language, targeting this specific person who works at this company. And it's going to output exactly what you need to be able to actually successfully phish them. But on the flip side of that, it's also helping defenders, because it's helping us dissect these methods. It's helping us understand sort of, big incidents, big complex incidents with, very kind of long and sophisticated, what we call attack chains, the sort of different steps that an actor has taken. So the playing field is always moving, and it's sort of just keeping, the attacker moves forward a little bit, and then how the defenders move forward a little bit, and sometimes the defenders are a little bit out in front. It's constant back and forth. And AI's done good for both sides of that.
I think that's interesting, and I guess it's not just text-based. When you talk about scammers using potentially not their native language in romance scams or CEO scams and things, now you could actually put your voice into a voice cloning tool.
Deepfakes.
Yeah, and just have a romance scammer on the phone actually sounding like an American or British man. So yeah, definitely scary in terms of what's coming. But finally, to wrap up our Halloween special, I'd love for you both to share something that our listeners can binge, either your favourite horror movie or horror series. What do you recommend? Derek?
Shall I go first?
Derek first.
Well, obviously,
T-shirt,
wearing a Ghostbusters t-shirt, so I'll have to say, definitely watch that. But my favourite horror film at the moment is probably The Thing.
What's it about?
1982 supernatural
Classic
body horror by John Carpenter. They're stuck out in the Arctic at a research station, and there's an alien.
Oh,
exciting! The Thing,
if you will.
Yeah, and it's got the best 80s practical effects ever.
Ah, cool.
I'm gonna say American Psycho. Patrick Bateman. Not going to ruin the twist at the end, obviously. But if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. And look at Paul Allen's business card.
A good business card.
Very good business card. Eggshell, I think. Yeah.
I'm going to go for American Horror Story Freak Show, the series, because it's one of my favourite series. I'm a visual animal, and I love anything that's really overly stylized. And I know that American Horror Story tends to get a bit, they lose their track throughout the series, but the first few episodes of Freak Show is incredible. And Dandy, who is like a son of a very wealthy family, inherits a huge amount of money. It's set in, I think, 1950s Freak Show in America, and he kind of buys one of the freaks as a toy, essentially, which is a human being, and also it's a bit of a scary clown in there, and I love a vintage clown costume. So it's a really good bingeable series that I will definitely be rewatching in October. So thank you for joining us, guys, and thanks for watching the Halloween episode. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.